Hey, Shani.
Hey, Chip.
Thanks for joining us again. We have been on such a journey diving into all kinds of theological things and scriptural things around Israel and the church and the gospel. And I just really wanted to know, because I know it's quite core to Maoz's vision, this idea of all Israel being saved.
I see God as this he likes to prove himself, right? He says it over and I'm doing this for my glory. I'm not doing this for you guys because you're just a bunch of hooies, like you're messing this thing up royally. So he over and over is saying, I'm doing this for my name's sake. And sometimes intercessors would say, look, God, for your own name's sake, the nations are mocking your name because this is happening. So do this for your own name's sake. So God really has this thing where he likes to prove himself, right? So what greater show of his ability than to save an entire people group, the very one that he said he would make a light to the nations? I mean, to me, it makes sense if you kind of understand God and how he likes a challenge. But it's basically look, if you can save Israel, you can save anybody. We are the most not helpful people group on the planet when it comes to anything. You just see the prophets. It's to me, when everyone's so just oh, the Jewish people rejected the Messiah. Of course they rejected the Messiah. They rejected but when they were not following the Lord, they rejected all the people that God sent them. It made perfect sense that they would reject the Messiah. And that's what they do, is in hindsight, look at the holy men and go oh, wow, we were wrong. Look at that holy person, right? So in hindsight, it makes perfect sense that they're going to look back and be oh, wow, we really missed that one, right? And it says they will look upon him they have pierced, and they will mourn.
As one mourns for an only son.
Yes, and so that is clearly a revelation that God's going to put on them. It's not something that they're just going to be walking down the street and be I was reading in the book of John. I just happened to come across it in a library and read it. I came to this mental conclusion that this was happening. When you have the revelation, you missed it so bad. That to me is hey, do you like the verse, I will pour my spirit out on all flesh? Because if you don't have a problem with that one, then you shouldn't have a problem with all Israel shall be saved.
Okay, so we're convinced all Israel will be saved. It's going to take a miracle, all the fragments, all the people that disagree. I love that great thing about how you can, you ask two Jews the same question and you get three answers.
Yeah.
Rabbis and all that. So, but what is Maoz Israel as a global network of ministries and churches? And how is Maoz helping to bring that about, all Israel being saved?
Right. So the premise here is, when God tells the children of Israel, I'm going to give you the promised land, he is saying it's going to happen, but there's still the practical application of it. There's still Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, right? There's not just they walked in and everybody runs away. They go in there, they have to fight, they have to send spies in. There's all sorts of on the ground things that are happening to manifest what God said is going to happen. And so in the same way, as much as the scriptures say all Israel shall be saved, there has to be a practical application. There have to be people on the ground that actually go there and start doing the work. And so that is essentially what Maoz is doing, is coming to Israel. The ministry was started in 1976. My parents came here and they said, hey, this is what the scripture says. Let's start living it. And they start looking strategically, how do we build a community from zero? It's not the first time that Israel has come to the land and had to build from scratch. And so there's the spiritual application. So what happens when believers come to the land and want to build up a community of believers who have embraced all the covenants that God has offered them and want to live in the land just like he said we were supposed to? So essentially what Maoz does is just very practically looks at, okay, if we want a strong community, this is what we need. We need congregations, we need resources, we need to help the needy, we need training, helping people, get into the country and get settled, all the practical things. And of course, as you see the studio behind me, establishing worship, which was like the thing that Israel did when they, came back to the land. Even Nehemiah, when they were rebuilding Jerusalem, he came and he's like, why are you guys just rebuilding the wall and not establishing worship? Because we have to have both. One is not good without the other. And so he reinstates the Levites in their place, because worship was something that Israel is just supposed to be doing. The worship from Israel 3,000 years ago still influences worship today. If you look at the Psalms, I mean, they didn't have studios back then, but they had scribes and they were writing down, and the records that we have, we still use today to write new songs. So how much more is that same calling that is irrevocable relevant to Israel today? And so we're just doing the practical application of establishing worship is a recording studio and getting kids trained. We've got 60 kids that are taking classes right now to get excellent in their instrument. We've got dozens of musicians that come in and record in the studio. And we've got dozens of songs that even during a COVID year, we were able to record. So the Maoz is the practical application of all Israel shall be saved.
Brilliant. So good. Oh, man. If people want to find out more about Maoz and maybe get the updates and even start sponsoring or donating, what's the website? Can you tell us?
The website is maozisrael.org. You should know that Maoz we are essentially 3 generations living and ministering in Israel. The stuff that we write is just insight, spiritual insight, prophetic insight, scriptural insight, and just local insight. Hey, I was driving down the street and this is what I saw, and this is what I can let you know that's happening that probably won't be in the news. And that enrichment of getting a sneak peek into Israel and getting a sneak peek into the scriptures from an Israeli perspective is what we have to offer. So it's Maoz Israel, Maoz, Israel, Israel.org. And you can sign up for the articles that we write, Stories from Israel. You can sign up for the prayer letter if you want to know how to pray smart about Israel and not just, the pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If you want to pray for specific things that are happening that week, then that goes out as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Shani. Love you guys. Praying for you. Believing for great things.